Today's lecture is going to be on middle childhood. Sometimes it's also called the forgotten years, but it's roughly ages 6 through 12. We'll be going over physical development and health, cognitive development, and then some factors and assessment methods within the pre-seed, proceed model. I originally thought that I was going to break middle childhood into like 6 to 9 and then 9 to 12, but I've decided to do physical and cognitive health together, and then talk a little bit about special education and the school system in this lecture. And then next lecture, I'm going to talk a lot about social and emotional health, social emotional development and behaviors, and then bullying and aggression as well. That's something that I always get asked a lot on when I am teaching. And so I want to dive a little bit deeper into that for you guys, and then we'll look at more factors and assessments in the pre-seed proceed model. So it is called the forgotten years. A lot of the research and a lot of time that we spend in the child development world is spent on 0 to 5, because we know that's a huge time for brain development, and also looking at adolescents because they can be tricky as far as their brain development as well. But some of the decisions that adolescents can make can have long-lasting impacts on the rest of their life. The forgotten years, on the other hand, it's typically marked by big jumps in cognition and ability to think logically. Children enter into the elementary school world. They're not physically growing as much as they were. They're really working on that cognitive ability, and then also socially how to kind of live within the world. Because of this, they are more often overlooked as an age period, and that's because they are less rocky socially and emotionally than the time before them and the time after. Having children that are 6.5, I can notice that they seem a lot more stable. We've kind of gone out of the toddler and preschool temper tantrums and magical thinking, and we're more into cognitive, logical thoughts, and they are becoming a little bit more regulated on their own. So I definitely see personally and professionally why this is often called the forgotten years. I do want to jump into physical development like I always do. So it's slower compared to other developmental ages. So they're only really growing 2 to 3 inches a year. When you think about a child's first year of life, going from a 7-pound newborn up to almost a 20-pound 1-year-old, that's a significant jump in actual length growth. And they typically become leaner. They have a more athletic appearance. But as far as differences between the two sexes, they're still quite similar in how they look, their proportions, and all that type of stuff. We're really going to get into puberty in 3 weeks when we'll talk about puberty in the next couple weeks. So both sexes look fairly similar. If you were to have a boy with very long hair or a girl with short hair, or one was wearing pink and the other was wearing blue, if you were to swap kind of how we assign gender in this culture, most commonly how we assign gender, you would probably have a hard time telling them apart because of how similar they look, and they're quite lean and muscular at this age as well. The interesting thing about health at this age is they need very strong peer modeling, and they need really strong adult modeling as well. So we know that health behaviors are learned, and we always want children to meet their highest potential by engaging in healthy behaviors. This is a class based on child development and the pre-seed proceed model, which is kind of a public health model. So obviously we want health behaviors to be positive for children. So parents still need to, as the regulators of their household, make sure that the child are going to bed when they are supposed to. They have a balanced and varied diet, and then they at least an hour of physical outdoor play. They should be getting an hour at school between recess, PE, if they're lucky enough to have it, and then another hour at home, either broken up into the morning and the afternoon, or outside after school, being able to be physical and engage in outdoor play. This is also an age where we see that the physical and outdoor play and just movement, the movement of their bodies tends to decline at this age, and then it continues to decline the rest of your lifespan. So engaging in family physical time is really a great way to do it. Swimming, running, biking, hiking. They're not toddlers or preschoolers that you're teaching them how to actually do these things. They are probably very proficient at it. And in my case, my children are more proficient ice skaters than I am. I am quite clumsy on ice skates and I fall, and they pick it up really, really fast. And we can do that, which is kind of a fun family activity. My brother and sister-in-law, they have my two nephews and my niece, and they have started a Sunday afternoon skating rink tradition that they do as a family, or sometimes they go for a bike ride, or they live up in Temecula, they'll go for a hike. They're just trying to do something active on Saturdays and Sundays, specifically Sundays, because they had noticed they had been spending a lot of time indoors watching TV, hanging out, watching the Olympics. So they're trying to start a new family tradition of being physical and doing something fun as a group. We also need to know that they are going to look to their peers for information on health. So this is when peer pressure is important for all children at all ages. If I have picky toddlers, I'll tell the parents to have them go to a mommy and me class where they can see other children eating different types of food. And when they see other children trying vegetables and things like that, they'll be more apt to eat and become less of a picky eater. And that also carries over into this middle childhood as well. They are going to school most likely. They are at recess. They are at lunch. They're engaging in PE. They're playing a lot with their peers. And so they're going to look to their peers for information on health. And if peers have older siblings, or if they are a bit more worldly, they can be passing on things that might be more negative, early smoking, early drug abuse, things like that. Or it can be positive as well if somebody's into sports, like soccer or things like volleyball, then a child might feel peer pressure in order to engage in more positive health behaviors. So we need to keep in mind with health at this age that now it's kind of a balancing act between how the parent can regulate their nutrition and their sleep and their play, and then also allowing them to learn from their peers as well. So safety, last week we looked at an article about safety and car seats. So accidental injuries are the leading cause of death around the world for children. 22 million children are hurt in accidents each year. And the most common deadly accident is being struck by moving vehicles, either in a car themselves or as a pedestrian. Injuries at school are really like playground related, and the top culprits are the monkey bars, far and away. My daughter's friend broke his arm on the monkey bar last year here in Oceanside at a park. I've had two children break their arms when I was a preschool director on monkey bars, and then the climbing walls. I had a climbing wall. It was only 5 feet high. And somebody broke their foot falling off of that. I'm not trying to be cavalier in passing this on. So it's kind of a balancing act between kids break bones and we don't want children to break bones. So ideally we wouldn't want children to break bones. But when you look at how some children play, and as they are growing and as their physical abilities are changing and becoming a lot more complex, and they're 10, probably much better at sports than adults are, they are going to start getting hurt more often. The causes of actual death, though, are cancer, hereditary defects, homicides, and then deadly infections like strep, hepatitis, and then the other one, don't remember what the other one is, but those are the types of things, and those are the biggest cause of death outside of transportation related causes. Then chronic health conditions. This is where children who are born with them are now going to be more active participants in starting to manage them. So for children who have type 1 diabetes, this is about the age when their symptoms will become a lot more prevalent, and they will start to be diagnosed with it, and it is a lifelong thing. They have a lot of actual summer camps for children with type 1 diabetes, but you can spend time with your peers, and then older peers as well, like teenagers, learning how to manage something that you're going to have to really be on top of for the rest of your life. There's pumps, there's shots, all of these types of things, being really careful with what you eat. So it is something that children at this age are getting diagnosed with, and things that they're going to have to learn how to manage. There's like acute ones though, which is like a brief, like a cold or the flu or something like that. So that's an acute health condition. And then there's a chronic one. So I have a chronic health condition. I have asthma. I'm one of like the 13% of children who have it. It's definitely genetic on my part. My father, my uncle, my great uncle, and my grandfather, within like just that last generation, we all have asthma. Mine can be environmental as well. I run in the summers outside, but as soon as we get our like Santa Anas and things like that, or when we have cold weather, I need to run inside so that I'm not being exposed to cold air or dry air or windy weather or pollen or something like that. So a lot of children have this, and I do remember that in this middle childhood time was when I became more of an active participant in my own asthma. In PE classes, I had a general note, you know, that I have asthma and, you know, it precludes me from certain activities, but I also could make the decision about how much that I felt that I could run, and then stop when I needed to. So that's a way that children are becoming more active participants in managing their own chronic health conditions. Hypertension as well. Unfortunately, high blood pressure is something that we are starting to see in young children as well. And medication is really an issue with children because they're not adults and they're still growing. So I worked with a family where the child had epilepsy, so that's definitely a chronic health condition. She's going to have that for the rest of her life. And even in the middle childhood where you're growing less, it was definitely an issue for her because she would start to have seizures. That was when we knew that her medication dosage was now too small because she had gained weight or she had gotten taller. And then we would, the pediatrician, the pediatric neurologist would then have to adjust the dosage of the epilepsy medicine that she received. Unfortunately, this would make her really, really tired. Sometimes she would sleep. I had her from a toddler up into middle childhood. I worked at a center for 5 years. And so sometimes as a toddler, when she was growing a lot and medications were being adjusted a lot, she would sleep the entire day and we would have to wake her up to eat. Then we would know that that was a little bit high and then the dosage would have to be increased. So it's kind of a guessing game. Obviously the pediatric neurologists know the most about dosage and they make fantastic decisions, but it is something that changes how the child interacts with the world around them. If you are really sleepy, if you are feeling hyper, if you're feeling lethargic, things like that, those medication changes can affect your physical development, your cognitive development, and your social development as well. So chronic health conditions are something that children at this age are becoming more aware of, and they're participating more in their care as well. So mental health, and I'm going to circle back to this at the end as well. It is a huge topic. It should be a class on it. It's on its own, social and emotional issues, mental health issues, and I'll bring this up as we go after spring break. When we come back, we'll be doing a lot of special issues that have to do with children as well. But really that because they are entering into elementary school, they should definitely be receiving treatment and services for the physical, cognitive, social, emotional issues. So that would include dyslexia, which is like a reading comprehension cognitive issue, anorexia, which is like a social emotional body image issue, ADHD, which is like a neurochemical issue, bipolar, which is kind of very high manic stages and very low depressive or anxious stages, depression, phobias can be quite common, and then trauma from domestic violence. A lot of times people hear me listing these things and they think that this should be exclusive to our adolescents. And these are definitely issues that will be affecting our adolescents and I'll talk more about, but it is things that we see in our children as well. For things like dyslexia, it's because you're entering into school and you're showing characteristics of this cognitive delay. And so you're going to have to go and get services and treatments and be able to read the way that your brain needs you to be able to read, have print and books that are going to support you. One of my favorite professors who was getting her doctorate when I was learning from her in my bachelor's degree had severe dyslexia. She had to read when she would lecture. She had very specific ways in which she lectured. She never really lectured from PowerPoints. It was really difficult for her to lecture straight to us and then turn around and like look at the PowerPoint and then back. She said that the words would become all jumbled and kind of swim in front of her eyes. So she lectured from traditional notes with very high resolution print. So like a very easy to look at print type. And then they were very high as well, very large print as well. And then she had bookmarks that were very brightly colored so that she could read through it. Not having pictures or anything really didn't affect it because she was such a fantastic speaker. She really made it come alive with her words, and her language development and her passion for it really were so high, and that was such a strength of hers that I really loved it. So dyslexia is definitely something that we are seeing when children are entering into the elementary school ages. Bipolar, depression, things like that, a lot of that we're now learning has to come from our brain and our brain development and how the chemicals within our brain are interacting with each other. So it's very understandable that that's something that we're going to see when children are quite small. I've worked with children that have depression, ADHD, both of those diagnosed in kindergarten and first grade. Obviously, trauma from domestic violence children, if you're in a domestic violence situation with your family, that's something that you're going to be showing signs and symptoms of the entire time that you are exposed to that trauma. So it's something that we see at this age, and it's something that it really helps that you have that treatment. And that's why elementary schools are so important, is that they have prescribed ways in which you can get these services given to you at the location where you are learning. So you are mainstreamed or you're pulled out or something like that in order to give you the best services you can so that you can meet these challenges head on. It should become comprehensive and holistic as well. So looking at the whole child and the underlying issues as well. So we're not just going with like medication and speech therapy or physical therapy. While those are vitally important, we're now seeing the importance of behavioral therapy, play and art therapy, drug therapies. We're looking at a lot of different things to see how the child can be supported. I want to jump into physical play though. So at this age, 77% of this age engage in play like riding bikes, which is fantastic. We should learn how to ride bikes. The best thing about this type of physical play is that it's unorganized. So it's led by children in the sports and games that they want to play. And I like this because this is bridging social and emotional. You're mediating conflict. You're working with others. You're using the pragmatics of speech. How do you use speech to communicate with people what you want and need within a social context? And it happens less and less, but it still happens in schools, on playgrounds, in neighborhoods, and in backyards. Gone are the 1950s stereotype of, kids wandering around the neighborhood. We still see it from time to time, but those kind of times in America are ending up. And now we are shifting to children being on playgrounds, being supervised. But it is better to let 6, 7, and 8-year-olds have some kind of supervision, but to let them lead their own sports and games and play. Rough and tumble play, chasing, yelling, wrestling, tumbling. It's actually like a really universal mammal behavior. If you go to the zoo or something like that, you see that children, like the lions and jaguar babies, even like the little ferret babies or the little muskrat things, all baby mammals engage in this because you learn through play. So you're learning conflict negotiation, you're learning pragmatic speech, you're learning how to regulate your emotions, you're learning how to be a good sport when you lose. Those types of things are really important for children to engage in kind of unorganized physical play with each other. But then sports are actually really important as well. At this age, actually, only about 38% of children play an organized sport. By the end of this time, so 11, 12 years old, that number is much, much higher. But and that I see that myself as well, having children that are 6. So I've kind of just entered this forgotten years, middle childhood. It's rare to have somebody engaged in very serious organized sports, although it depends on where you live. But these are led and organized by adults, and these are fantastic as well. As you improve motor skills, you are learning strategies about playing, cognitive strategies about playing, and then you're processing instruction from adults and peers while moving, which is very difficult as well. So you're having to take a lot of sensory information from around you, people yelling, the grass, you're running, all these types of things, and process those instructions in order to comply with them on a soccer field, if you should pass the ball, or playing basketball, if you should shoot, or should you dribble, or should you pass. You know, you're making lots of complex decisions that have a lot of impact on your cognitive development. And then socially and emotionally, how are you within a team? Are you a leader? Are you a follower? If you lose, how do you behave? If you win, how do you behave? So sports can be really important for children. It's not one size fits all. I think it's unfortunate in some neighborhoods and communities where it's all football or it's all basketball. There's a variety of different sports. I kind of deliberately chose the pictures that I have because soccer is like a very large group one. Tennis is kind of a one-on-one or pairs. And then martial arts can be more of a solitary thing. So there's a wide variety of sports that children can choose depending on their own physical strengths and then their cognitive and social emotional strengths as well. We should really be finding something that works for the personality and the temperament of the child. But in motor development, we're really seeing an increase in agility, strength, ability, and proficiency. So with our fine motor skills, you're going to be able to do like friendship bracelets. So you have small pieces of yarn that you can braid and weave and things like that. You're starting to write your letters and numbers. And by the time you come out of middle childhood, you're proficient. You can both read and write. And then you're able to, as far as gross motor skills, ride a bike without training wheels. You should be swimming, maybe the length of the pool. Skating with rollerblades or skateboards, something that you are learning, and then running very fast, probably faster than me, and once again engaging in that rough and tumble play as well. Climbing walls, and we have a really cool climbing gym here in Oceanside that I've taken my 6-year-olds to, that has classes for young kids, and they can do all kinds of like climbing and things like that. And they're much more proficient at it than me. Their strength kind of astounds me. I mean, I guess they weigh much less than me, but that they are kind of able to do that much faster and with more agility than I have. We're going to jump into cognitive development a little bit as well. So right now we're kind of going into Piaget's, so Jean Piaget's concrete operational. And this is what I talked about earlier in the lecture when I was talking about their big jumps and able to think logically. And they're really becoming more adult-like in their thought process. So they are able to kind of think about different concrete things and apply it to them. So two of these are conservation of liquid, which is that very traditional Piaget experiment where you have the very high, you have two glasses that look identical that have the same amount of liquid in them. You take one of them and you pour them into a very long tubular glass that's much higher than the other one. It's still the same amount of liquid, but the child is going to think that it's two different amounts of liquid. This also can be done with clay as well. And then there's categorization as well, and that's lining items up by size or shape or color. And then also I gave a group of children buttons to play with to sort buttons. And that was my thought was, that they'll do it by size. So like big ones, small ones. So I picked out different colors so they'd have, 5 different colors to pick from. And then I did shape, like some of them were circular, some of them were squares, triangles, stuff like that. These were like antique buttons I had gotten from my grandmother. And then I had different colored ones, patterns and things like that. And then one afternoon, one of the kids was working on it and he had only 2 piles. But he was very diligently sorting them, and I really was confused because there was no rhyme or reason. Like there'd be a purple square and then a green triangle and then like a patterned one. Like it didn't make any sense. And he was like 7, and I was really like almost concerned about it. And then he said that he was sorting them by the amount of holes in the middle. So when there's a button, the part where you can sew it, and it was either by 4 holes or by 2 holes. And I was like shocked that he had this creativity, that he was able to logically apply to this categorization that I never, ever, ever would have chosen to sort buttons in that way. So that is something that this age is able to do. And then there's transitive inference as well, where they're comparing objects. And then there's which one is longer. So you're giving them like 3 pieces of yarn or something like that. So which one is shorter, which one is longer, and they shouldn't have to like really compare it or measure it with any type of thing. They should be able to look and see what's happening. Class inclusion as well. Distinguish between a whole and its part. So a bouquet is made of roses and daisies, so that they know there are roses and there are daisies, and how much of each. That's something that like a 2 or 3-year-old would just feel like it's flowers. There's flowers. They're pretty red flowers. So this age is able to be like, okay, there's red roses, there's pink roses, there's white daisies, there's carnations, and then even if you took them out, they would be able to sort and count them into it, and then they would be able to bring them back into a whole as well. So those are different types of categorization, but really what we are doing by giving these children tests and researching this type of thing is to figure out what their thought process is like and how are they logically able to think about things. So they also, as part of this, engage in reasoning. So there's inductive and there's deductive reasoning. And inductive reasoning is kind of logical thinking based on observations. So you're able to make general conclusions about other groups or objects, and deductive is that they is more flexible and using concepts and generalizations. So we really they really engage in inductive reasoning at this age. So they are little observers in their worlds. My twins just did a Notes on Nature Presidential Week camp that they really enjoyed, and they had a little notebook, and they went, I think it was only 3 days for a couple hours, where they went to a nature center or a lagoon, and they took notes, and they drew pictures of things that they had observed. So what does a duck's feet look like? What are the things in between a duck's feet? Oh, that's the webbing, things like that. So they were able to make conclusions about groups and objects, in this case, ducks and birds. How are ducks and birds different? They both fly. Some of them have webbing, some of them don't. So that's kind of an example of the inductive reasoning that children can engage in. Deductive, though, is more flexible. You take the idea, the things, the concepts and generalizations that you've made through observation, and you apply it to other situations by being adaptable and by being flexible. So this is really something that an older middle childhood, a child that's older in the older part of middle childhood, or an adolescent can engage in, and not something that our 6 or 7-year-olds can really engage in yet. But they are at this age becoming less and less egocentric, that they can understand that people have their own perspectives, their own viewpoint, and their own emotions that they bring to the table when they're interacting with people. So last week I had talked about kind of the perspective test that we do with children, where they're seated at a table, and there's different types of mountains that are in front of them, and then there's a doll on the other side of the table from them. They can only describe the mountainscape from their point of view and not from the doll's point of view. Around 7, and then with more and more ability, they have to describe what another person would be seeing from their actual perspective, which shows us that they have a little bit more ability to think about other people and their own emotions, and to take that into consideration when making decisions. I do want to talk about Gardner's multiple intelligences. This is a huge kind of revolution in how we think about learning, especially in elementary schools and more formal education. I remember learning about it in the late 90s, early 2000s when I was becoming a preschool teacher, and it definitely has influenced how I have worked with children 100%. I think we always knew this. If you were to talk to a mother 200 years ago, 500 years ago, 5,000 years ago, they would be able to tell you the strengths and vulnerabilities of all of their children. But we often prioritize cognitive development and cognitive ability within societies. And so people that could read or write take a lot of prominence. This kind of spreads it out so that all of the strengths that you have as a person can be represented. So there's musical, that needs no explanation, you know, if you're a musician, that type of thing. Then there's kinesthetic, which is how you move your body, movement, physical ability. Interpersonal, the ability to work with others, have empathy, learn from their perspectives, work as a team. Linguistic, the ability to talk and to communicate your wants and needs with others. Logical, that's kind of more the cognitive ability. Naturalistic, being able to work with outside, with other things, the need to be outside and to be one with nature, or as we learned a couple weeks ago, kind of that Japanese idea of rooted in nature, I think is very similar to the naturalistic part of Gardner's theory. Then there is visual, spatial. These are different to me a little bit. Spatial skills are very different than visual skills. I am not a spatial person, but I am a very visual person. I learn 100% by seeing, and I'm very creative. I actually went to art school for a couple years before I switched my major and left the school in order to work with children. But I am not spatial. I'm terrible at geometry, space planning, bin packing. Not a skill of mine. And then there's intrapersonal, so the ability to know yourself and have self-awareness. And then there's existential, kind of the philosophical, who am I, where do I fit in with the world? When I started teaching, there was not existential or naturalistic. Those were not what I had actually learned, and I like that they have added those because it kind of makes the circle. That's why I picked this, is because of course, we're going to have strengths and vulnerabilities, but if we were to look at all of these and work on all of these, it would make us a really, really well-rounded person. I bring this up because some of you are looking to become therapists and educators, so we need to work with children that have strengths in all of these different areas. A lot of times, the kinesthetic learner is left out of elementary school or more formal education. This is somebody who needs to be moving their body and learns by doing. So I've given some ways, and this is from Edutopia, which is a fantastic website for educators. But these are some ways that you could work with a kinesthetic learner. You make letters out of bread dough or out of Play-Doh. The bread dough is very Montessori or Waldorf. That's very specific to their educational method. But you can make pipe cleaner letters. You use your whole arm to make letters, that type of stuff. In kindergarten, you see a lot of the children, they'll be like, A, apple, B, bread, that type of stuff, because they're learning and moving their bodies at the same time. Where you sit, you'll see the bouncing balls, or you'll see kids sitting on the floor or crouched, things like that, that can really help with kinesthetic learner. I've seen in very innovative classrooms, like kids that are typing on typewriters, computers, blackboards, huge pieces of paper on the wall, the whiteboards everywhere, so that you can get up and move while also engaging in fine motor and cognitive lesson plans. Taking a walk, reading words that you find during a walk. And then for children, when they do need to sit down, like in a lesson or a circle time, something like that, like a worry, those squeezy worry things, or a koosh ball, or like a worry stone, something like that, where they can engage in a repetitive physical behavior is really good for them. It shouldn't be fidget spinners. Educators hate, if you talk to a teacher, they hate fidget spinners and they confiscate them like crazy. But it's not actually, I mean, I guess if you're going like this with it, it's repetitive on your side, but the repetitive behavior is more on the fidget spinner itself as an object. So if you are going to be doing something like that for your ADHD, or just because you're a kinesthetic learner, it should be something where you're actually engaging in the repetitive behavior of smacking it like this. There's like cubes where you can do certain things. If you are repetitively doing something, that can calm your mind, but it needs to come from the movement of your own body and not from the movement of the object of the fidget spinner. Brain development as well. So brain density actually declines. So neurons at this age are getting pruned like crazy. So it's that use it or lose it. So if you're not using the neurons, they're going to get pruned, specifically in the cerebral cortex as well. But the fantastic thing is that the white matter is increasing. So those are kind of the fibers that send information between the neurons. I've got an image right here of kind of where white and gray matter is. And this leads to brain development progress, specifically in cognitive function, attention, and ability to use logic, which is fantastic because that's supporting what Piaget was saying, which is with his concrete operational, and it's supporting that Gardner's theory as well, is that we learn in huge ways. We don't want to prune. We want to keep those cognitive neurons firing. So we need to support people as individuals and be holistic and meet them where they're at, help them with their vulnerabilities, and let their strengths shine. Part of this, though, is executive functioning. So that white matter and that cerebral cortex are really helping us with executive functioning ability. So it's the ability to exert conscious control of your thoughts, behaviors, emotions, and actions in order to accomplish goals and solve problems. I know lots of adults who do not have executive functioning skills. People who have mental cognitive issues, like mental retardation, things like that, typically don't have executive functioning skills. And that's why if they do have a job, they need to be driven there, or they need to have a job coach or somebody else at a group home or at their own home who gets them there on time, who supports them in those types of things. Because executive functioning is something that our children are being able to do, but it's a very high level ability to think. And I'm going to go through it as an example that I came up with. So if you went to school in California in 4th grade, you did your mission project, and you're about age 9 to 10 when you do this. If you didn't grow up in it, we have the mission. If you didn't grow up in California, we have the mission system here. And to give us a taste of California history, you have to actually make a mission, like a huge mission. At the old school in the 80s, it was made out of like clay or sugar cubes. Now we have Michaels and Amazon, and they look much, much nicer than the ones that I remember making 30 years ago. But I'm going to break down, because this is such a huge kind of project, how you would use executive functioning as a child in order to do this. So you receive the project. You're working on the missions. You need to figure out what tasks need to be done. So how many things do you need to do in order to turn in this mission project? You need to plan out how to handle the assignment and get organized. You need to break down the steps into a series of steps, especially if you need to buy or order things and involve your parents in those steps. You need to figure out how much time is needed to carry out the plan, and then set aside time. You need to ask parents to buy materials, or you need to ask people to take you to the library. You need to make adjustments as needed. Maybe you get sick, you lose time, you go on vacation, you need to visit a grandma. So you're going to need to make decisions like, I need to skip back baseball practice because I need to work on my mission. Or I'm not going to be able to play outside today because I need to work on my mission project. And then you need to finish the task in the time allotted and get the project to school with parents. You need friends to find the band to get there in time. There's a lot of things that are going on in order to get a mission project completed at the age of 9 or 10, which is right smack in the middle of our middle childhood. So that ability to kind of do these types of things is very high level thinking. People with fetal alcohol syndrome, Down syndrome, and other kinds of cognitive impairments might never reach this stage. They will not have the white matter in their brain. They will not have the neural connections in order to engage in this executive kind of functioning. And so we need to really support families and support children in engaging in executive functioning, and having parents model how to do things and be involved in the mission project and support them, and then sometimes allowing them to fail as well, is how we learn it and prioritize it for children. So if I was teaching this in a lecture, what I would do is we have, are you smarter than a 5th grade? If you just Google it, you can take it. I think last semester we actually had the best rate. We passed. We got like a 72%. I think that was the best I've ever gotten. Most of the time, we are not smarter than a 5th grade. We have a whole show about it, about the fact that we have forgotten a lot of the cognitive memorization and concepts that we were supposed to learn in the middle childhood. We have kind of not learned those, and most fifth graders are probably more physically agile than us and have retained a lot more information, facts, and concepts than we have as well. We probably have, hopefully, we have better emotional regulation, executive functioning skills, and social skills as well, but that is debatable because I know 40-year-olds who act more immature than, 10-year-old boys. So I do want to touch on language and literacy as well, because they are great at verbal communication. They make themselves understood by others. Pragmatic, so that social construct of speech and being able to use the social aspects in order to get what you want is much more sophisticated as well. And they also know nonverbal communication. So we know nonverbal communication is really important, and that's something that our little ones sometimes will just not pick up on. Context, intent, the unspoken rules of conversation, and a lot of times little ones will not pick up on the cultural issues of it as well. Some people talk with their hands, some people have their hands down, some people don't make eye contact. It really depends on the culture that you were raised as well, and then that's also something that they are beginning to understand as well. For our little ones and our ones in middle childhood who have maybe an autistic spectrum disorder, these are the areas where they're going to need more support. The pragmatic, the nonverbal, things like that. They typically, as young children, will need speech therapy, but if they have higher level functioning of autism in middle childhood, they probably have really good verbal communication. It's just that social aspect that they need support on. And we're really lucky, especially in San Diego, we have fantastic kind of groups. Include Autism, and then there's, I think it's Include Autism, it's down in Hillcrest, and they just very specifically work on social skills. They take children to museums, to stores, to pools, all those types of things, so that they can learn by doing and learn in the moment from trained therapists who are often college students overseen by people who have master's degrees in how to kind of work through these social skills. So elementary school. So right now we're using our Common Core standards, and it's contentious and it's controversial, but nothing in education has ever not been contentious and controversial. It always has been. There are a million ways to learn. There are a million ways to teach. Everybody thinks that they're doing it the right way. So I just kind of like to leave it at, we follow Common Core standards because we are in California. If you lived in Texas or Alaska, you would not be following Common Core standards. It's actually something from the Department of Education that is each state's choice. So right now, California has chosen to do this. It is a change in the way that we're thinking. So we are trying to teach less to a test and more towards how children learn. Is it perfect? No. Is it confusing? Sometimes. I've seen the math books for middle childhood for like 8 and 9-year-olds. That is how children of the 80s, 70, I'm a child of the 80s, but older parents that have children in those ages, which is my age, that is not how we learned. And so we are having to reframe how we think about things and concepts that we think are kept in stone, like math, and we're thinking of new ways to bring this to children so that we can have stronger thinkers that think more broadly and more globally about the things that they know, and they can apply it in different situations. So I think that is a plus in that it's going to change how we teach children, and I think that that's always a plus. It always needs, as generations change, education should change as well. That is my own 2 cents on it. I would love to hear from you guys if you don't agree with me, or if you have other thoughts as well. Then there's educational choice, charters, magnets, homeschools, things that were very fringe are now more mainstream as well. And so school districts are having to bring in and make places for some of these people as well. And then now technology is more present in the classrooms as well. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. The research is really iffy. It's something that as a field we need to put more emphasis and more education and more research time into really high quality studies that involve a lot of different children and how they learn. it is here to stay. My children have iPads in their kindergarten classroom. I like personally how it's used. I think Oceanside has made a good decisions on how they use it. It's not too prevalent. It's not overwhelming, but I think they're supported in the new technologies that every single person uses, and that they are native users and they really understand it, and they will probably be able to use it better in their education than we thinking about it can. We're thinking about it from our own childhoods and our own ways that we learned, and so thinking that way is probably much more limited than how my 6-year-olds, who have always known iPads, who have always known Netflix, who have always known that Elmo can be called up in 5 seconds, they're looking at it then a completely different way than I'm looking at it, where, if I wanted to change the channel on my black and white TV, I had to get up and I had to go walk over and I had to, tune the dials. And then one day we got a VCR in 1987 and it was the best day of our lives. So generations are changing, education is changing as well. But that's why I bring this up, is because our little ones are coming from a very specific moment in time and they are entering into a very standardized system, which is elementary school. So are our little ones with special needs, and that's what I want to talk about as a little bit as well. So I talked about it in infant toddler development. So if you have a child who you think is having some delays, you would go to a regional center. So the County of San Diego contracts with regional center, who I work for a vendor of them. And then, or you go to First Five or Rady Children's Hospital, or your pediatrician. There are lots of different ways that you can get services for an infant or a toddler. After the age of 3, it is then handled by the elementary school, and you get an IEP, an individualized education plan. And this is something that identifies your strengths and your vulnerabilities, and they make very specific, very measurable, very achievable goals to get you to where you need to be for those vulnerabilities. So for example, if you had Down syndrome, you would most likely enter into a preschool that has typically developing children, and then children who have a wide variety of special needs. There will be lots of aides in the classroom. And you will have an IEP that looks at your physical development, your cognitive development, your fine motor development, and your social and emotional development, and you will have goals in all of those areas, and you will be working with a variety of therapists who support you on that journey. Once you enter into kindergarten, you still have an IEP and you still have access to all of those therapies. At that point, there's a bit more segregation. We're getting better at mainstreaming children, children with autism, even children with Down syndrome, fetal alcohol, things like that. If you can, you are going to be placed into a least restrictive environment, which is the law. So you will be mainstreamed, if at all possible, with an aid or with technology or with supports in the classroom to help you learn. You might get taken out in order to attend therapy services like physical therapy, occupational therapy, or language therapy, speech therapy. But then you'll be mainstreamed as much as possible. Some children can, and they do enter into special education classrooms, but we're noticing that there is less and less of those classrooms, as we are finding ways that we can support children in the classroom. But all children until age 18 are entitled to education through their local public schools, and they get the services that they need. They're identified and then given the services that they need in order to be as successful in their classroom as well. As a parent, though, you do need to advocate for your child, and you need to advocate for the goals that are going to be most appropriate for them, and then the therapy services that will be most appropriate for them within the elementary school as well. So I talked a little bit about it, but some of the bigger things that I see is the dyslexia and the autism. I talked earlier about dyslexia, and it's kind of a cognitive thing where you kind of switch letters. You could switch numbers as well and have numerical dyslexia. But then there's autism as well, and autism is a spectrum disorder, as I'm sure you all know, high functioning and then low functioning, although those vocabulary words are starting to change as well. And so depending on, let's say, where you fall on the spectrum depends on the type of services that you receive, one-on-one aids or just speech therapy. It's all really, or even outside of the mainstream classroom. It really depends on the severity of the behaviors that you have, and then the ability that you have to learn within your classroom. So I do want to talk about ways that we boost academic achievement at this age. We scaffold. So good old Lev Vygotsky, our Russian theorist from the last lecture, taking schoolwork, you scaffold. So there's the things that they can't do and then things that they can do, and you are going to give them the appropriate supports and help so that they can get the things that they cannot do so that they can achieve those. A big thing as well is to highlight the personality characteristics. So not, you're so smart, you're so pretty, you worked really hard. I like how you spent so much time working on those spelling words. You got to 100%, great job, thank you for working hard. You have determination. You were using your time management skills, that type of thing. A place to study that is probably out of the way or can be a little bit quiet. It depends on the child once again. And when I talk about ample books and supplies, it doesn't have to be the cutest stuff at Target. It can be, you know, construction paper. It can be copy paper that you can get like 700,000 pages at Costco for $5. Pencils that you get at the dollar store. You don't even have to buy books. You can go to the library once a week. It's just having kind of that around you so that you have an environment that supports academics and supports cognitive learning, so that you can engage in that as easily as possible. So having things that they can write and scribble on and practice on are going to be really important. Limiting TV time and screens after school. There should be some active play, there should be downtime, and there should be homework time in addition to, you know, 30 minutes, an hour of TV time. We know that at this age, unfortunately, children can, I think the average is 6 hours a day of screen time, which is a lot. So I always want to prioritize active time and then downtime as well. You just spent 6 or 7 hours learning. You were with a bunch of people. You were learning with your peers. You were learning through a teacher. I almost consider it their job. And so when you come home, you usually want to sit down and crack open a beer, you know, and relax after a hard day's at work. A child's equivalent of that is to play, is to run, to read a book, to not talk to anybody, or to talk about your day, that type of stuff. So however a child needs to process their day, they should have the ability to do that, either actively or to have downtime. Another great thing that I was told from a fellow mother who has children older than me, because my oldest are only 6, is to ask specific questions about a school day or social aspect. Who did you play with? Did you resolve that conflict with Anaya? Did you play on the scooters this time? Is the scooter fixed? What book did you check out from the library? Is your teacher back from being sick? So I always start out with how was your day, because I think it's just like reflexive at this point. Hey honey, how was your day? I asked my husband the same thing. But then asking more specific questions, so then you don't get the yeah, fine, huh, it was always fine. So that was I just passed that on because that was great mom advice that I received myself. But socioeconomic status can contribute to environments that are less cognitively stimulating. So that was kind of links back to that play was a place to play, place to study with ample books and supplies. If you don't have the extra surplus cash in order to do that, there is the library. But if you are homeless, or if you're in a drug and alcohol situation, or if you're in an abusive situation, providing for children an environment that is cognitively stimulating can be more difficult, and it can definitely be more of a challenge, and we need to support those families in getting to a place where they can provide for their child. We know that with our infants and toddlers, families from lower socioeconomic status talk less, and they expose their children to more verbal communication vocabulary throughout the day by the thousands. And so this is also part of that, in that cognitively they are not stimulating their child by taking them to museums or parades or community events that broaden their horizons. So I want to jump into the pre-seed, proceed model and just a little bit of like research and refreshing type of thing. So once again, this is our pre-seed, the outcome, the impact, the process, the implementation. I wanted to give you kind of, we kind of started from the macro. So from the beginning of the class, when we talk about ergonomics, I've been trying to link it into things that are real world, so you can get kind of a whole sense of how pre-seed, proceed is used in our communities or communities around the world. Now I want to get into some of the factors, some of the process, and maybe some of the vocabulary words so that you can better understand the research models that I am giving to you. And then hopefully you are working on your policy paper. So by learning a little bit more about this, you have some background in order to learn more and do research on your own. So we know that the educational environmental assessment is the factors, and that's the pre and the precede. So predisposing, reinforcing, enabling, and I want to go specifically into some of these. So predisposing factors would be the knowledge, attitude, beliefs, and values of a community or a family or even an individual that we're looking at. Then there's reinforcing factors, and I like this as well because it's a lot of like community and family. So peers, our health professionals, our societal norms about those types of things. And then there's our enabling factors, which I think is something that we need to talk a little bit more. So it's our availability of resources, our accessibility or the ability to access services, and then community or government services. So I found this image online. So some enabling factors that they were looking for were what makes travel possible. So better transport, so new transportation technology. In this case, they were looking at trains and steam engines and things like that. Better communications over a longer distance through telegraphs was also something that they had. And then as travel and transport and technology kind of trickled down, we had faster, cheaper travel for a variety of populations. And then accommodation, facilities, and services on trains and through trains also increased as well. So I thought that was a good example of looking at travel historically, using enabling factors to talk about the resources, the services, and then the community government services that we have. So I hope that that kind of gives you a little bit more background into the enabling factors, which I felt like we kind of, there was some confusion about. Then jumping into the behavioral, environmental, epidemiological, and social areas. These words, because pre-seed proceed is used by so many people in public health, community health, child development, adult development, things like that. These words have almost become interchangeable within the pre-seed proceed movement. You'll see behavioral outcomes, behavioral diagnosis, behavioral assessment almost used interchangeable when you're looking at different research studies. But the four areas always stay the same. So it's always going to be behavioral, environmental, epidemiological, and social. But then depending on the research or how they're doing the research or what it was, if it was literature, that type of stuff, or it was a research review, then you'll kind of have the word outcome, diagnosis, or assessment, depending on how they did their research or why they did their research. But when we're looking at the assessments, really, we're looking at kind of, or the four areas that I was talking about. In social, we're looking, what kind of social assessment is really, is kind of economic and social indicators for a population, and then within pre-seed proceed model, the individual. So kind of that idea that Uri Brofenbrenner had of the macro and the micro. There are economic and social indicators, so that mesosystem, that larger macro system that are influencing a population and then influencing the specific people that we want to help with these health outcomes. Then there's behavioral, so we have specific health-related actions, and those really support or cause or impact our health outcomes. So what are people doing? What actions are they actually engaging in? Like smoking, that's supporting or impacting health outcomes or even causing something. So we know that there's a correlation between smoking tobacco and lung cancer. So that would be something that would be a negative health behavior that people engage in that have an impact on their health. And then there's environmental. You're accessing factors in physical and your social environment, and you're interacting with those behaviors to impact your quality of life. So the environment that you live in, both physically, that you live in Oceanside, that you're middle class, and then socially as well, middle-aged mom with 3 children, that is my environment, that is what I interact with. Those cause me to have behaviors that impact my quality of life. I'm going to go on to epidemiological. It needed its own page because epidemiological, I think, is kind of a really complex thing to be talking about. So I actually am going straight from this book called Epidemiology in Public Health. It's by Ashengrau and George Saig. It's a textbook that I have found. It's quite good. It's quite expensive as well. So I'm going to be kind of taking the basics of it and be helping you guys through it. But really, when we're looking at epidemiological research, it's really, why do people get hurt, ill, sick, or just in general have poor health? So it's kind of a branch of medicine, and it's with the incidence, distribution, and control of diseases. That's like the official Merriam-Webster definition. Well, really what it is it's a study and analysis of health and disease in defined populations. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the most famous example, the most historical example, which is from London in the 1800s. There's cholera. It's a waterborne illness. It makes people sick and then they die. In the 1850s in London, and that's actually where I did my master's work. I went to the University of London. I actually lived quite close to Broad Street where all of this was happening. People in the vicinity of Broad Street, which was a poor working class neighborhood, were dying at incredible rates from cholera. At this point, medicine was in its infancy, and people kind of thought that it was like a blood disease, or we knew it had something to do with kind of squalid conditions of the working poor. But this man named John Snow actually went around and he started to look at pumps, and he started to look at populations, and he started to interview people. And he got mortality rates, and he got population rates, and he got who was related to who, what neighborhoods where. And then he identified that it had something to do with the water source. And so he started to look at poorhouses, working houses. He looked at a pub where people were working and they didn't drink water because they had a daily ration of liquor and beer from the things that they made. So they had almost no cholera. And from that point, from those interviews, from looking at mortality rates, from looking at populations, from looking at maps, he was able to identify it down to a very specific pump. And I'm trying to remember, I think it's called the Broad Street Pump. And that's where the epidemic of cholera was coming from. It was coming from a specific kind of contaminated water source that was coming in at the specific pump in the streets of London that a wide variety of working poor and working class people were drinking from. And that's kind of the father, John Snow, which I'm just realizing, is it Jon Snow? Yeah, which is actually a character in Game of Thrones. So you guys should probably all remember that. Not as good looking as the actor, but Jon Snow, John Snow, is the father kind of epidemiology, and he probably saved a lot of lives by noticing how this was kind of happening. So that's kind of a broad historical view of epidemiology and how it was kind of born. The important thing that you guys need to look at is incidence and prevalence. Those are kind of the words that you're going to want to be more aware of when we're looking at epidemiology. Incidence is just the occurrence rate and frequency of a disease. So how often it is happening. Prevalence is incidence is the occurrence and the rate and the frequency of a disease, and then prevalence is the commonness of it. So when we're looking at that, we want to be really aware of incidence and prevalence. And then we also want to be aware of reliability and then validity as well. So when we're looking at research studies, and epidemiological studies are typically, we're using research that other people have done, because looking at populations, looking at mortality rates, all those types of things, a lot of that research might have already been compiled for us by the Centers for Disease Control or the Department of Health, things like that. Health and Human Services have a lot of that kind of information. To do an epidemiological research study yourself would probably be completely overwhelming. It would be a large amount, and it's not something that you would really engage in probably without a doctorate or a medical degree. But we can learn a lot from it in the social sciences, and we can use the data that they've already collected with us to make differences in how people, in people's health outcomes. So these bullseyes are a really classic example of the reliability and the validity. So my head is blocking it. Unfortunately, let's see if I can get my giant head out of the way. There we can. So we're looking at something that's both reliable and valid. That's our end goal. That's what we kind of want to work at. If it's reliable but not valid, you're going to have all of your dots and all of your data in one area, If it's low validity and low reliability, your data is going to be all over the place. And then if it's not reliable and it's not valid, then you're going to have it be kind of that in between those two. So you're going to have data in one specific place, but more dispersed. So we want research that is both reliable and valid. So reliability is just consistency and validity is accuracy. There's a lot more that goes into it, but our Psych 101, Child Development 101, Pre-C, Pro-C Model 101 is just really the ability to measure and attribute consistently. And then validity is just looking at a test or measurement accurately and reflecting what it purports to measure. And we will go a little bit more into that in our discussion boards as well. So in our discussion boards, we'll have a little bit more about epidemiological research, incidence and reliability and variability and things like that in order to give you a little bit more understanding and vocabulary to help you in your own policy research for our policy paper that will be due in May. Have a great week.